Okay, we're gonna call to order the January 23rd, 2023 Special Education Subcommittee meeting. Please call the roll.
Mr. Aguirre?
Here.
Mrs. Larrabee? Here. Ms. Rogers?
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made, whether perceived or unperceived, by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. First item is no citizen input today. Thank you. This is the first meeting that we have our new Assistant Superintendent for Special Education, Laurie Obenchain, so we'd like to welcome you.
Thank you.
And the first item is an update on program discussions, and I'm going to allow the superintendent or yourself to just kind of go as we go forward.
Sure. So you also have a one-page in front of you that just documents kind of each school, how many students with disabilities are there, what type of programming is in each building, the number of students that participate in substantially separate classrooms versus inclusion, the inclusion teaching staff, the BCBAs. And the purpose for me giving you this document is twofold. One, if you look, do you have 2 pages there?
Yes.
Okay, so if you look at the back page, I want just to point out that in June 2022, the total number of it's on your first page, sorry, my second. June 2022 at the bottom, the total number of special education students in the district was 2740. The first 5 months of this school year, we've already increased by 237 students. So we're up to 2,977 students. That is going to be important as we go into budget season this year, if we go into strategic planning, that you know that already in 5 months we're almost above at the 250 mark for including for adding special education students in the district. The other piece that's going to be important in this document is actually on the second page for you. When we look at the current number of pre-K students that may be transferring to kindergarten, we have potentially between 45 and 50 pre-K students that are going to require a substantially separate classroom. And again, I want to put that on your radar now for the subcommittee as we're going to go into the budget season and we're going to go into strategic planning. Those are all key pieces. The rest of it is really just for your knowledge. I know, it's been a little while since we've updated like how many BCBAs, how many school psychologists. So I wanted you to have this to reference moving forward.
What do you mean by service only? What is that, 45 to 50?
They come into the school, into the parent engagement center and receive speech services or OT, but they're not in our pre-K program. But when they enter kindergarten, they would still be getting those services. Any particular questions on that document right now? Like, this is, again, just for informational purposes.
Does anybody have any questions?
Not right now.
How many do we have currently in sub-separate kindergarten classes?
So I didn't break it down.
Or what's our capacity, rather, for sub-separate kindergarten classes?
So the regulation for sub-separate is 12, but it can go up to 14 with notifying of parents. We do have some classes at 14, most are at the 12.
But how many classes do we currently have?
Of just kindergarten?
Yeah, so I'm
Sub-separate.
looking at these numbers. If we have 45 to 50 going in, do we currently have capacity, or are we going to need...
We're going to have to add classes.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
we're
was
going to
my
have to
question.
get more,
And in our lower grades, we have multi-grade,
Right.
so it might be a K1 classroom. But with the numbers like that, we will have to add classrooms in lower level. Absolutely.
Yes. So out of this 237 in the last 5 months, how many of those were our current students and how many from out of district?
moved into the district?
Yes, moved into the district.
I'd have to get you that breakdown. I can get you that breakdown, but I don't have that off the top of my
Just
head.
wondering about that.
I will say that the data shows many of our kids being referred are K-2, younger kids.
In district,
Right,
K-2, no.
a lot of these kids had interrupted schooling. Some of them didn't enter kindergarten. Some of them didn't have pre-K. Struggling with regulation, et cetera. And many of our students, our numbers are increasing in the lower grades.
I mean, I think this was something we all said was gonna, we were expecting
Absolutely.
Yeah.
this to come full force.
And here we are.
For sure.
Ms. Orchard.
Sorry, I was like speaking out of turn before.
No problem.
Do we know how many referrals we had from early intervention so far this year?
I'd have to ask Ms. Farias about that.
I think that
For our-
in the Friday email,
There was a
we
number,
gave you numbers of
yeah.
the kids that were the ones that had been
Projected.
referred, and then the ones that were in queue to be
Okay.
evaluated.
Yeah.
But we'll get you that information.
Yeah, let me go back and.
On that same note, I think it's not necessarily for this meeting, but I know we've mentioned in the past, doing a cost-benefit analysis of servicing pre-K, as we want to improve our pre-K, to look at what is a cost and versus what the reimbursement is. And there's things like we need to, by law, service the children that need it, that's one thing, but by increasing access to pre-K is good across the board.
Right.
But there's also like what we legally need to do versus, and I think we need to do an analysis of what does it cost to educate, how much of a top step teacher, let's say, or whatever, it can probably become costly per student versus other
Right.
areas. And I think it's just good information for us to have, and I've been a proponent of it, but not necessarily looking at the numbers to see what is the total package. And I know we worked with the community on one of those grants that they were gonna keep some of the students in there. I think you know what I'm talking about, right? That-
Yeah.
How does that
3-year-olds.
impact our legal responsibilities?
Okay.
Because if it covered, the child, that we had a grant, I think prior to you coming, was an early childhood, some sort of grant where the children were at X center.
Yep.
Instead of them coming to us, they just kind of used that grant to keep them, and I could be saying it a little bit
Yeah.
wrong, but, so
And
they
we
were gonna
provide
stay
services.
there.
Do we provide
instead
the
of-
services there?
They were already having
Yes,
some,
we
so
go
then
there and
it was,
we
that might,
provide the
specialists and,
special ed service or whatever, but they stay in their daycare, and it's mostly daycare providers, so kids that might qualify for early intervention that we go out to
yes, it
support.
might just be something to peek at as we
Yep.
try to improve it.
Okay, I can actually put that information.
I would comment on, I think this is a good data, this is good data for us to have. Just seeing it now, I don't have
We'll get a
a lot
breakdown
of
though.
questions per se, but equality across the district, like we get to know, which I think you're probably looking at. Does it make sense that one place has X and they have this much support?
Right.
Another one has the same, and we did that with the ELL
Mhm.
paras, and, so not for today, but I'd be curious
That's
of
the
that.
start of what we're putting this all together for,
Yep.
right?
The cluster coordinator and BCBA, I would have questions on that in the future as well
Yes.
about what do they do? Like, I can read a job description, and I have, but in reality, what is it, now that we've had it for a few years, what does it work? Is it the best model? Is it not the best model? What do they do for assisting the principal in the building? So those are future questions, I guess.
So just to give you the staffing, the next breakdown is the staffing. We have 74 current posted special education positions. 10 candidates have been recommended to HR for appointment. So it would be 3 CODAs, 1 SLPA, and 6 teachers. Then we have 23 other positions filled with agency staff. The remaining positions, so again, 74, minus about 33, so about 41 remaining positions. Those are being covered in different ways across the building levels. I can give you some examples. We have dual certified teachers in some of our middle school classes that are servicing the special education students. We have existing classroom staff stepping in to be teachers. during all of those pieces, we are still tracking compensatory services. So that's what I'm working with our team on now is at our next department meeting, we're going to bring all of the data about compensatory services together to start to look at what is that going to look like for either, after school, before school, or in the summertime. How are we going to provide those compensatory services? The other piece, the school psych and the speech and language pathologist support. We have 3 open positions for school psychologists out of our 15 total positions. We are contracting with some independent providers, so the retired school psychologist from Boston Public Schools is going to give us some hours to be able to take the lift of some of our evaluations for our school psychologists. And so I'm meeting with the lead school psychologist to determine how that person may help us, what makes sense to which evaluations we would give to him. And then we have one other person that I'm in the process of speaking with that, again, is a school psychologist that can help the lift. I've met with all the school psychologists and the speech and language pathologists just to let them know that we are here to support them, and we are looking into other ways because there's just, we keep looking for staff, but there's just not a lot of applicants, and even the agencies that we're partnering with to find staff aren't able to find these particular positions. As far as the speech and language supports for the evaluation, it really has to do with the bilingual evaluations, which again, we've even reached out to our collaboratives to see if they have any bilingual evaluators. I did find 2 independent speech and language evaluators. They do work full time, so we have to kind of work on scheduling. But again, I'm working with the lead SLP on that. And then I know there was a question about one-to-ones. So even though the one-to-ones are posted, all of the students do have that individualized support that according to their IEP. So what they'll do is, especially in a pre-K situation, there's multiple paras in pre-K, so they will assign one of those paras to be the one-to-one while they're actively seeking an additional staff member. And so far, it's been working across the district, so we haven't had any students who have a one-to-one on their IEP be without a person during the day to meet their needs. And we're also using some agency staff.
That's a struggle. Everyone's suffering with staffing, especially for special ed and ESL.
So I think in summary, when I look at programming and I look at staffing, really the staffing vacancies remain one of our biggest challenges. So you brought up the cluster coordinator position. A lot of our cluster coordinators are filling in for classrooms that need additional support. So if we have a teacher who needs support to write IEPs, they're writing IEPs, or they need help in meetings, they're chairing meetings, they're doing all different things outside of the role in order to be able to help us with the staffing shortages right now. Again, not a surprise, it is everywhere, but I wanted you guys to know where we're at.
Any questions?
Not right
Ms.
Yes. I'll just start talking. So we're missing essentially 41 staff, so
Across the
district, right? So when I'm looking at that, is there any consistency in who's being pulled to cover in those special education classes?
Consistency, and what do you mean by consistency?
Do we just have, it's a different person every day?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, we
Because
have
that
the
has
same.
happened,
Yes.
which is why
And I'm
I'm
not going to
asking.
say it never happens,
Right.
right? But no. So the principals, and that's what I meant by consistency, the principals are really looking at their staff and they're moving things around to be able to have a consistent person in the classroom for the teacher.
Same thing.
My kids need it.
Right, and so that was immediately
Yes,
where I went to
yes.
because that has happened
Yes.
where we've had, this person is, Annie is covering this classroom
Yes.
today,
Yeah,
but then
period 1 and then
Right.
period 3. That's
and then
not.
Johnny comes in and is covering
Yeah.
the next period, and that doesn't offer any. So that doesn't offer support for our kids. If anything, that creates more chaos
Right.
for our
Hindrance.
kids.
Yeah.
Right.
And then same thing with the one-to-ones. So if we're using paras to cover, are we designating a certain para
Yes.
in that classroom and that person is fairly consistent working with that kid.
Yes.
Versus it's gonna be this person today, that
Right.
person tomorrow.
They're assigning, when I asked all the supervisors, they're assigning one person to be with that student, again, from the classroom setting. So,
Okay, because again, that was a conversation that we've had in the past about there was some philosophy around, kids should get used to working with different staff, but that's not really what we need one-to-ones for, right? We have a
Right.
one-to-one and speak
Most
to
of
that
the
kid
children
as a-
that have one-to-one struggle with
struggle with that
relationships.
change, and so we need to make sure that we're trying to support those relationships.
But they're coming from somewhere, so that's what I would, wherever they're, if consistent or not, they're
We're
coming from
lacking in
somewhere
the
else, so
other
one.
they're
Right.
creating a
Yes,
hole somewhere
yes,
else.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I'd be curious just to see for those vacancies, if you could get us something on what holes are they coming from?
Like I said, it's mostly the para, like, so if a classroom has one teacher, two paras, one of those paras will become the one-to-one. Or preschool typically has like 3 paras in it, so one of those paras will be the one-to-one. It's
Yeah,
typically
I'm
the
thinking
para.
of as they get higher in
Older,
grades,
right.
like where, because I don't think that we have an overabundance of paras in other places to
No, we
pull from a
didn't,
non.
yeah. So I think some of the older grades, I don't think we have as many one-to-ones, but those are filled with agency paras. And I know, I was just having a conversation, we have a student moving from one building to another. That agency para is moving with the student as the one-to-one, right? So the para is not gonna stay at the building they're in, they're going with the student. So, but we do have a few agency paras covering the one-to-ones in the, upper elementary school.
And with vacancies that high, I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah,
vacancies.
it is.
You're naturally gonna have,
Yeah,
things are gonna
that's
have
what I
to,
mean,
you gotta
yes.
do what you gotta do
Mm-hmm.
to get somebody in there, but ideally, we would like to fill those vacancies with whatever
agree.
plan, like.
Yeah.
I think we all agree with that.
And I don't think we can incentivize per se financially. The union positions, just like everybody, we can't say, well, we'll give a bonus if you're certified in special education.
We would have to open up the,
Right, I mean, I think that's in the future, maybe something that we should consider, because
Yeah.
if you can go to the highest bidder, if you're out there and you're certified, then
that's exactly what's happening.
if we're not as competitive, then how can we bridge that gap
Mhm.
without, but also I think using relationships and having a plan with the HR department of outreach, like you're saying, that I'm sure that the guy from Boston that you talked about didn't just come. Somebody knows him to say, okay, well, can you help us out, can you do this? I don't necessarily think we build that infrastructure ourselves.
Right. It's part of the special ed directors in the area, the urban directors. We have a list of like independent contractors, a bilingual staff that we can like pull from. That's where I found these independent people. But even then, like I had a list of probably 20, and maybe I sent an email to every single one of them, and maybe 4 or 5 got back to me. So, even they're pretty booked.
The only question I had was on the school psychologist. There's some vacancies, but I've seen a lot of turnover this year in that, and
We actually, I think that you're seeing it refresh itself. We have 3 people who have left us this year. So I know that those positions are refreshing, so it gives the illusion that more and more people are resigning. So we do have someone who actually was a part-timer who went elsewhere, and then we have 2 full-time positions that they also resigned.
yeah, so I would just stay on that so that we can figure out.
Absolutely.
And exit interviews are always good, but they're not necessarily
Then,
valid,
right.
because you're not gonna get the real story unless you really get to know
Right.
the individuals if things aren't going smooth.
I've said that to the whole team already. Like, my goal is to keep people here so that we can do the work, because it's hard to do the work when you're always bringing on new people, right? So, and that was my point for meeting with all the different groups, because I know that everybody's doing more this year.
You good?
I'm good.
I have questions.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so back to, we have 18 pre-Kers who have qualified for a placement and are waiting a placement. Right, that was in the Friday email.
Okay.
Special
Okay.
ed?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so when we say that they are waiting for a placement, does that mean that we have a signed IEP, that child should be in a classroom placement, but we don't have a physical capacity for it? Or does that mean that we're looking at that?
That was those 2 additional classrooms that we're proposing,
Okay.
remember? So they'll be placed, we needed
Okay,
spacing
I
for
just
them.
I wanted to clarify that because I was
Yeah.
looking at that.
Mhm.
We have 18 qualified and
Yes.
waiting, and then
So
24 vows.
they're not quite 3 yet. So
Got it.
from what I remember.
We're still in compliance.
Right,
Yeah,
absolutely.
What Ms.
Okay.
Faris had said is that's why she's being proactive about,
Okay.
right, that they're not, so that if we get the other classrooms, then by the time they turn 3.
That was the
Right.
piece that I was missing,
Mhm.
that they qualified, but okay, they're waiting
They're
because
not-
they're not
yeah.
quite 3.
They're not quite.
Okay. And my other question was, could you just clarify this column? So the supervisor caseload,
Yeah. So we have,
maybe it's because it's late in the day, but
I
like
know.
I'm not
So sorry.
processing
So
what
we
that
have
says.
six special education supervisors.
Yes.
And so when you see the first block, we have a supervisor that oversees the 3 schools
Mhm.
over there plus half of Durfee. So when I take the special
Okay.
education students per each school and half of Durfee, the total for that particular supervisor's caseload is
Okay.
the number you see there.
All right.
Right?
I
And
got
same
it.
thing down below, right? The Durfee has a part-time, 2 part-timers filling the 1 role for Durfee. So I just want, again, I want the committee to understand the supervisors, the caseloads, and because we have to talk about kind of, what, in order to build or strengthen our special education programming, what does that mean for the staff that we currently have when we have to look at our priorities and doing the work?
So really high caseloads for them.
Why does the one say 354?
So that's just pre-K. So ELC is our early learning center, and then the PECM is our walk-in services at Pace. And so if you take those 2 numbers and then you see the pre-K numbers in each building, if you add those up, it becomes the 354.
Okay.
So we have a director of pre-K.
Or what I was just saying is 354 versus 725 up above
Yeah.
versus 637. Like, what is the rationale for? Is it more intense? Is that because the younger children? Like, what?
No, it's a different role. So she is the director of early childhood, even though she's still considered a special education supervisor, but she's only responsible for early childhood. Because there's more that goes into it, right? You have to work with EI and get that transition going, and so the supervisors, the breakdown, this is something we've been talking about as a group, because they've tried all different ways to make it the most sense. They've done logistics as far as like how the distance between schools, or elementary versus secondary, in all different ways to try to make what makes the most sense to be able to provide the right type of supervision. But it is something that I would like to revisit because the numbers are very high.
Very high.
What I'm suggesting is the way that this looks. So you gave a fine explanation, but it doesn't show that here. So as this goes forward to the full committee at some point when you pass out whatever we do, I would note somewhere in that's almost like a 0.5 supervisor. So when you say you had supervisors, I just counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like you said,
And it's
6.
not, 'cause
You
even-
really got like 5.5
And not even
because the other person, whatever the percentage is,
Yeah.
and then it
Yeah.
just would be truth in advertising. So nobody else looks at it and says, "Oh, that."
Yeah,
seems
that's
like
why I
a-
tried to put 0.5 next to the Durfee one, because,
Right.
Yeah, I would just add something to show that.
yes, okay. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to
I know it's
put
good.
it all
I
down
think
on
it's good.
paper.
But that's why we ask the questions,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
like help me understand that because I'm confused by
Yeah.
it. And then I have 2 other things.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So one is a suggestion.
Sure.
So when we're looking at specialized programs, we do a lot of talking in functioning labels. You knew I was going there.
I knew you were.
And that's problematic, right? So we can't identify kids as low functioning or high
Yes.
functioning. So if we keep saying that we have a high functioning room, in theory that means we have a low functioning room. And is that really how we want to be identifying kids? So I would
Right.
encourage that we look at how we're naming classrooms. A language-based classroom makes sense, a social emotional classroom makes sense, right? We're not talking about a functioning label for our kids.
Yeah.
Because I think we all know that we function differently in different settings
Yes.
and on different days based on whatever it is that we need. So that's my suggestion.
I
in terms of
100%, I'm
terminology.
using the current terminology that we have here.
Right?
But
But-
yes, I agree.
When we know better, we do
Yeah.
better, right?
Yep.
And then my other question, and this is not going to be something that we look at today. It is not something that we're going to be able to solve. This is a long-term piece. We have in some of our schools, half of our students with disabilities, some of them, we have half of our kids in sub-separate classrooms. So what are we doing to move some of our kids back into our inclusion? Doesn't mean that our kids don't need sub-separate, because we definitely have kids who do, but we have a really high number of kids in sub-separate. So I'm hoping that we can be thinking about what are we doing to make sure that we have inclusion opportunities, genuine inclusion opportunities, not just the kid is in the classroom. How are they integrated into that every day? So that's a long-term piece.
We've certainly started those discussions, but definitely we need to have more discussions about that. And that's why I want the numbers there, so that we can kind of keep track of, you know.
We do
inclusion.
have kids who transition.
We do.
I mean, I've always had
Yep.
kids in sub-separate
Yeah.
as a principal, and we used to have a plan. So they used to have a plan that was systematic, and
We do,
I've
but it's
some kids that were very successful.
some
after
of them
exit.
are, and some need to be in sub-separate, right? And that's
Absolutely.
okay. That doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. Just when I see such high numbers of kids in sub-separate classrooms, what are we doing? What are we looking at in terms of making sure that those kids are genuinely
what's the process?
included?
Given the
Sure.
opportunity.
Right.
Sure, and I'll talk a little bit more when I talk
Yeah.
about priorities moving forward.
I'm done.
Good.
Okay, great, thank you. So 3.02 is a discussion about the CPAC overview.
So I want to thank Megan Murphy. First of all, she is our lone board member right now, and she has done a fantastic job of coordinating and collaborating with myself and our administrative assistant, Heather, to make a plan for CPAC this year. We've had one meeting that I did come to before I actually was on board, and that was more of a meeting the administrative team, so all the supervisors and myself were there, and I think we had maybe 5 families that joined that meeting. But now with, Megan really has taken the initiative to reach out to different groups. So we have a plan for the rest of the year where we'll be meeting every month. We're going to do a combination of virtual and in person, for a couple reasons for that. One, when we met in November, we asked families and they wanted, different options. And some of the presenters are only available to do it virtually. So that's kind of how we decided. So I gave you the list, but it's also on our website. If you've seen the website now, it's updated with some information. And so again, I think it's a great start for Megan to really spearhead this. We hope that in June we're able to do elections to have other board members. I'm currently working with her on, she sent me the bylaws and flyers and all different things that we want to make sure gets to the full CPAC moving forward.
Questions? Comments, thoughts?
Comment.
Sure, Ms. Rodriguez.
I think the goal, and this is just coming as a special education parent right now, is really just restoring trust with families and the CPAC, because historically we haven't had a lot of parents show, and sometimes what parents will say is that they just don't feel like it's worth it, right? Not because that the information they're getting isn't worth it, but that they just feel like nothing's changing. So I feel like if those conversations are happening, like here we're listening to the concerns and here are the action steps that we've taken, I think that goes a long way for families. But really, restoring trust and building those connections is huge.
May I?
Sure.
Speak of the consistency in the past, just so I have a little more information about the meetings. I don't know much about the meetings in the past, but how consistent were they compared to like what you're trying to formulate?
They've met
Yeah.
consistently
Mm-hmm.
monthly. I think that they've met consistently. I think that maybe the outcomes maybe weren't as people wished, etc. But I know that every month that they've met, they did.
Okay.
My recommendation would be to reach out to all the principals of the schools and let them know that the expectation is that they're going to reach out to their parents and get a few parents from each school. So when they do come to the meeting, and whatever the next meeting is, you identify what school the child's from, so that you can take it back to because the principals, counselors, all those, they have relationships with the people. So if they're the ones saying, we need you to come, maybe they need to come with, so that now we also have staff there and get buy-in. It's not gonna just be a few parents and then they're gonna say there's concerns and, we can listen, but I think getting more buy-in from our staff and putting that onus on the principals might make sense.
Is that generally the process? It goes from the principals to the parents? Is that what it is, our principal
No.
staff?
No.
No?
It usually comes through my office.
Right.
So we're looking into how to put it on Parent Square.
Okay.
We did, in the past,
We
we
used
used
to
to do
do
a
a
blast
calls.
email. We've done one calls before. We posted on our website, those different things. But, in previous districts that I've worked in, we have not necessarily the principals, but like a team chair, a supervisor, the SACs, whoever that has the best relationship to be able to say, hey, why don't you come try this? Or, and that sometimes generates more.
Right. I mean, you mentioned that the email, they get bombarded with
I know.
emails and they just,
know.
unfortunately, they don't respond because they
But the
get so
parent
many.
square is a text. That they
Right,
could-
right, and that's why I hope it does, we do
Yeah.
move forward with the parent square
Yeah,
aspect
I'm
of
going
it.
to get some help from tech with that because I'm still
Oh,
new
right.
to all of this. Okay, I'm still new to all of this.
But I still think having each school do it,
Yeah.
and I work in a school and I'm taking it upon myself, we're starting a CPAC. Now, I'm personally saying to myself, I need to get a couple of parents to the next meeting, which is in a couple of weeks. And I'm gonna take that upon myself because I know the people that I'm working with that this might be a valuable thing. Then if I ask them to go and I show up with them, probably gonna make a little bit more of a difference than just, hey, why don't you go?
Yeah.
So one of those deals.
Yeah.
So that's all, a suggestion, can't force anybody. Anything on that?
My comment on that would be, I think a warm handoff is exactly what's needed, right? So if you're telling me and I'm a brand new parent in the district and I don't know what the CPAC thing is all about, it is very unlikely that I'm gonna really wanna show up, right? Because I don't know what's gonna happen at these meetings, what's gonna go on. Am I gonna have anybody to connect with? So if we're connecting them with either somebody on the CPAC or somebody from their school that they're comfortable with, I would just be really nervous about flooding with so
That's
many
right.
staff. So if we have, one person from each school and they're bringing, now you're talking 16 staff, right, that are coming to the meeting. And that's happened, not where we've had 16, but it's happened before where there's been a lot of school staff and it has felt almost like families were bombarded, right? That they felt like it wasn't their
It's almost
meeting.
intrusive. I was going to say, I
Right.
think that at times the meeting becomes overpowered by FRPS, and it's their meeting. So I can see the recruiting and support, et cetera, but I think that we have to remember that's not our meeting. That's a meeting for parents and a resource. So we just need to do that connection so that they can access it.
But if Mr. Aguirre is a principal, right, and he goes and he's like, hey, 5 parents, I know that you're all interested in doing this. I'm going to go and I'm going to introduce you. I'm going to go with you to that first meeting to introduce you, and then I'm going to step out because this isn't really a meeting for you. I think that can make a difference as well. So they're going and they're creating that connection, but then also taking a step back and letting them, be able to go through their process without feeling like.
And the board members are the ones that are facilitating, correct?
They run it. Yes, they run it.
Okay.
Right now, again, Megan's doing it collaboratively with me
Right,
because
right.
she's a one-man show right now and she's doing a great job. So
She's an awesome one-woman show.
she is. She is.
All right, moving on, we're gonna go to 3.03, update on strategic plan status.
Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think in an effort to move forward, we have to acknowledge where we've been, right? So when I looked at the previous strategic plan, which ends now, I think it was a very ambitious strategic plan that was written 6 or 8 months before the world shut down, right? So as they began to resume the activity, back to some normal education, it still looked very different, remote, hybrid, in person, in masks. Our students and staff returned with new challenges that needed to take the priority. So from everything I've heard, I've seen, I've read, I think everyone put forth their best effort, and there were barriers that they didn't even know they were going to face. So I just wanted to focus a little bit on, what they did accomplish out of the last strategic plan. They purchased curriculum for our highest needs students in both the attainment, and they're piloting some of the Wonders supplemental curriculum in the language-based classrooms in one one school. They provided professional development to the staff in that curriculum, and in fact, in February's PD Day, we have attainment coming back. We have staff providing Styler Fitzgerald training, which is a different math program that's at one elementary school, and we have Landmark coming back in to work with our language-based students, teachers. They've trained multiple special education staff in the science of reading and specific reading intervention programs such as Wilson. So we have a list of Wilson's certified staff members that are able to provide that additional support when needed. We continue to have a partnership with Landmark. I just spoke with Landmark the other day to talk about, how we'll finish the contract for the remainder of the year, and what, some things that she has seen over the years with being in the district. We've provided intensive safety care, de-escalation training to many staff members throughout the district, which again was needed when the students returned to school. The special ed team collaborated with the Office of Instruction and the DESE to do walkthroughs, and I've been able to participate in a couple of those since I've been here. Master Teacher was purchased for paraprofessionals to keep up their professional development. We completed our corrective action plan for special education to address our compliance needs. Lead positions were developed for our related services to promote professional development in those specialty areas. That's not exhaustive. It's just a summary based on the information I've been able to gather in just 6 weeks that I've been here.
Any questions?
Just one. You mentioned Styler Math was only in one school.
Styler Fitzgerald, I believe, is being piloted in one elementary school.
Okay.
In our, I want to say.
So it's a pilot program?
Yes.
All right. I
wanna
wasn't
say
sure
in
why
our
it was
ASD
only in one school.
Yeah, I think from talking to some of our curriculum folks, they really wanted to do something small to make sure it was going to meet the needs of the students before they brought it out into all the other.
Yeah, I vaguely remember we talked about it. I was
at
just
the,
wondering where we were with that. Okay, thank you.
I don't this time.
You had mentioned that we have leads in each department. I want to say that there's job descriptions for, across the district, we have leads in various departments, and some have job descriptions that have the expectations, who gets hired, how they don't, whatever. Like, I just would want to make sure that all leads in the whole department have job descriptions, expectations of where they're going to get paid the extra money,
Yeah.
and what is the, back. So if that is happening, great. If not, I would take a look at it as a committee. So.
We actually are looking at that because we do have some that fell under, the first one was a teacher lead, and as we added leads, now that we've added so many leads, we need a job description that's specific to the position that they're in. They don't all fall under the umbrella of a teacher lead. The requirements for them and what they're doing is different than what an SLP lead would be, or even the lead psychologist. I agree. So we're looking at that and customizing those
and
job
criteria.
descriptions.
So like I might get a
Absolutely.
lead 1 year, and I might not be a good lead.
Right.
So do I get that for the rest of my career?
No, that's
It has to
actually, we put that in the contract, that they would have to reapply. I think it says 2 years and then they would have to
Yeah.
reapply.
I'm
have
talking
to.
about the
Yeah.
whole district, so we should have consistency of
Sure.
all the
Yeah,
departments.
I was already working with HR on those specific leads that fall under me. And
Any other
visiting
questions?
I don't.
Okay, moving on. Update on special education budget.
So I did watch the last subcommittee back in June, and I know there was a question about the remaining funds after the purchase of attainment. So there was like $175,000 left. In working with Mr. Almeida, we currently still have $158,000 in that line still for curriculum listed as like textbooks, technology line. It's written, the grant is written for moderate to severely, substantially separate populations curriculum. So what we need to look at right now for that the $158,000 isn't earmarked for anything different. So what I plan to do is, like we just mentioned, how Styler Fitzgerald Wonders and WonderWorks is being piloted in some of our sub-separate classroom. Attainment is throughout the district. But the other two programs that were purchased are only they were piloted, right? So I need to see if, working with the Office of Instruction, what other resources are needed if we're continuing with those programs so that we can bring consistency, whether you're in, a program in Henry Lord versus, Spencer Borden, there's some consistency across there. Once I have that information, if there are other remaining funds, then I will work with Mr. Almeida to look at our district priorities and then maybe amend the grants to allocate funding elsewhere.
And they run out when?
So this particular grant runs out in September 2023. So it's the 252 grant, but the other grants we can roll over.
Yeah, I would just, at that meeting when we talked about, I don't think it was identified for anything, of course, that's what we were told at the meeting. So it was sort of open. And then it was talked about as a, Mr. Loesch had mentioned like a across-the-board SEL curriculum or something that didn't really apply to what this was specific to. And that committee wanted to be like, how is this gonna help children that identified in special education?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't think curriculum is that personally. Like I think we have a lot of money to pay for curriculum. I feel like this money should be used for something that you feel as part of your plan is gonna really do some impactful things sort of outside of the curriculum. So I don't wanna be.
It depends what the grant
Yeah.
was.
This
Yeah,
particular
we have to-
grant is written to help students recover after the pandemic. Like it's a specific, it was only limited for 2 years. And again, just like any grant, right, you write it and you get approved, but we can move the funding to a different line and then get approval from the DESE.
And
It
I
was
understand,
approved right now.
I understand that you are new. I'm not, I watched the meeting myself. Mr. Loesch told us the exact opposite of what you just told us, so I'm not looking to go backwards. But at the same time, we weren't told that it had to be for that time, for what you just explained. We just were told we had 175,000 left over, sort of unspecified funds, so
Yeah.
I'll just leave it there. You know that my personal feeling as one member is to use it specifically for the children that you service.
Sure.
Personally, that's how I would want it. Any other thoughts on the budget? I think you're gonna talk about it in priorities, but one thing I just would like to say when we look at the special ed budget, I think we all in the committee would benefit, and you being new, I think this would be a good thing to talk about. Historically, where we've been over the last 10 years, let's say, in identified funding, so we've gotten a lot more funding in the district. We've also put a lot of money into special education and other things. I don't know what that means, relatively speaking. So I'd be curious to see over time, the needs are greater in special education. I'm curious to see how much the increase in funding for those children were in services relative to the amount that we've got overall. Because my gut tells me that we haven't put the resources, even though we've put a lot of resources in. I don't think we've put necessarily all the resources that we should based on the big budget. But that's just a Kevin Aggie, I guess. But I think that would be good going into the budget time to see like how much of the budget is attributable to services for special education
Specifically
children.
for special education.
We
Really
can
need
know.
proportions.
So proportion, so we say, okay, the special ed budget went up by 8%, which is only like 20% of the entire budget. But if the whole budget went up 20%, then we're shorting that particular, and the needs I feel like are greater. So as we go into the budget, I would like to, we usually go in and like make presentations and say, well, what do we think we need? What do we ask everybody? If we looked at it and said we should have X percentage of the budget, that's a different conversation than what do you need? Like what is the true, like we should have a little, trying to advocate for that department to get a bigger piece of the pie, if that's what the numbers and needs to look at. So it's just thought, food for thought. 3.05 is a discussion on department priorities, and I know you've only been here a short time, but I appreciate this being on here to get your input on it.
So I just kind of want to give you a little bit of what I've been doing over the past 6 weeks to get to these priorities. So I've held listening sessions, and they were just that, with each different group throughout our department, so related services or clerks or team chairs, supervisors, and I wanted them just, they had my ear. What do they want me to know about what they do in our department, the needs of our department, and that's kind of how some of the supports that I'm already trying to put in place for like the school psychs or the SLPs kind of came to fruition, right? So I did that with a variety of the groups. I also met with many building principals. I still have a few more that I need to meet with because we had to cancel. I visited all of our substantially separate classrooms, except I still need to go to Stone. And then I reviewed the Walker Report, the TFM, the previous strategic plan, our previous special education manual, our PRS complaints, in order to formulate the priorities. And I've come up with 3 different priorities, overarching priorities. 1 is compliance, 2 is programming, and 3 is instruction. And compliance is really looking at what are the roles and responsibilities of each position that touches compliance, and the oversight of that piece, because some of what I've noticed from the different reports and even our PRS complaints, there are things that we can just tighten up and we can be in compliance, right? But I need to figure out who needs to be responsible for what, in what role does that responsibility fall, and then overarching, how is the supervision? And that's why all those numbers in the front are important, so that you guys see that, right? And then our process and procedure manual, definitely it's from 2015 was the last time it was updated. There's been a lot of changes in processes and procedures. So again, I've asked people, and people are very willing to be part of the solution. So joining a task force with me to relook at our process and procedure manual, and again, to make sure that we are in compliance, to make sure people know if this is the process to ensure compliance, who is responsible for each step of that. So then the programming piece, like Sarah mentioned, how we name our program, the definitions of our program, the exit and entry criteria for students, how many opportunities do they get for inclusion, what do those look like, how are we tracking the students that move completely from a substantially separate classroom back to inclusion. That overall programming, looking at, we have strands now in various buildings throughout the city. How are those strands working out when kids are coming from all over the city to go to a particular strand, right? Is that making sense? Are we meeting the students' needs? What impact does it have on a building overall? And kind of that piece is going to take some work with some consultants, I believe, to really, really bring the change that we need to bring the consistency back to the district, across the district. And honestly, everybody that I've talked to feels the same way, right? They want the consistency, they want the processes, they want the procedures. So the staff is asking for it, the administrators are asking for it. Now's the time that we need to start moving in that direction. And the last piece is the instructions. So once we have the programming, and we need to think about, even the inclusion comes part of that programming. What does inclusion look like for our students? And then the type of instruction that they're getting in those different opportunities. What are we doing with center-based? How much time are we using technology, right? Like how many hands-on or real-world experience do our students get? So those are the overarching. Again, I will need to be working with leadership and staffing to do this work, because it will be, it's a big lift. But again, people are motivated. So from those overarching priorities, my plan is to set up different task forces to set specific goals under each with those action steps, right? And then we'll use that to develop our strategic plan. We'll use that to bring to this committee for budgeting.
Mm-hmm. I think you stepped out when the 3
I can
targets.
still hear.
Okay, you
Yeah.
had it. Okay, just wasn't sure.
I had said earlier I was waiting for.
No, I know. I just didn't know if you heard the
So I just wanted you to be aware of what I've been doing the past 6 weeks, what I've identified as our priorities, and then my next steps moving forward to hopefully put a strategic plan in place by the end of the year to be able to facilitate the work.
Any discussion? Questions? Ms. Rodriguez?
I'm just floored that the last update that we made was in 2015, right, to that.
And that's what I've been able to put my hands on, and I've asked different people. I'm not saying, I mean, again, you know, when
Right.
we live in the world of technology, it's supposed to make our lives easier, but sometimes the abyss
do the
of technology. So it could be there, but again, what I've been able to put my hands on, and when I'm speaking to different people.
Well, the fact that that's all you could find, right, that says something. So even if it has been updated, who really has been aware of those updates? If you couldn't find it coming in, you know, that worries me. And, you know, when we're talking about strands in different schools, like, is that a conversation that we have? Does it make sense to have all of these strands in different schools? Because we are shifting kids around, right? Or do they belong in their neighborhood school with the resources that we can bring? We can't do that without staffing, right? And I understand why
space.
we
Staffing
did
and
that.
space are two
I
different
get why
schools.
we did that, right? Gee, I think we might need small neighborhood
Small
schools,
neighborhood
right?
schools.
Been there, done that. But if we're focused on inclusion is not a place, right? We've had that conversation many times. So we should never be saying like the inclusion classroom. It should be like, what is our process to get kids to be included, to belong, right? Because this is their home community. But if they're being moved to Henry Lord for this classroom, and then we decide that they need another placement, and then off they go to Laterno for this classroom, and then along the way we're like, oh, that's not really meeting their needs. Now they've got to go here. You know, how is that really fostering any kind of belonging, right? They don't belong anywhere. They belong everywhere, but nowhere at the same time. And you know, that's not fair. Especially, I'm thinking of our littlest guys. You know, they start in one place, usually in pre-K, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to stay there as they move forward. So we got a lot of work to do, but it doesn't mean we can't do it. Right?
Some of our separate programs, one of the reasons why we created strands at schools was to minimize the transitions, because we used to have we used to have multiple grade levels at each of the schools. So if you were in elementary, let's say Viveris, they might have had a K1 classroom, a 2-3, and a 4-5, or just a K-2, you know, and then another classroom somewhere else, and kids would be jumped around like that. So in order to minimize those transitions, we created strands in different schools so that kids could have that consistency K-5 or 6-8. Like for the middle school, for instance, we used to have one grade level at, let's say, Cuss, one at Talbot, and one at Morton. And instead, what we did is we moved that program into one of the schools, one of the other programs into another school, so that kids that were in there. But if a student services changes, you're right, then it creates that instability and then they have to move. But I think the intention was to minimize those transitions, but it's taking them in many cases out of their neighborhood school because they go according to where the program is, not according to, it's going to create a staffing issue. You are absolutely right, because we can't possibly have, and spacing, can't possibly have one of each program at every single school and have that strand. But that's something.
And that was the
we need to
recommendation of
work
the Walker report too, to kind of consolidate
Create that consistency.
that piece. But now we have to look at, like, we've been doing it a few years, right, or a couple of years at least, and like, what are the, you know, pros and cons of that particular programming, and more specifically for me, the impact it has on the opportunities for inclusion. Because if you have classrooms that are already, you know, full, and you have kids coming from all over the district to a substantially separate classroom, how many opportunities of inclusion do they really have, since they're not in that count overall, right, to begin with? So it can get a little, but I just don't know enough yet to be able to really give you.
There is no 100% right answer.
I know.
And
No, there isn't.
I'm very clear and very understanding of that, right? So we do things in a certain way because our needs at that point say this is where we need to go, but then we reevaluate what our needs are, and is this really serving our needs? Is it really serving
And
our
the needs
kids?
get greater and
And
greater
the needs
every
get
year.
bigger and bigger,
Right.
and so what do we do? And then we have a pandemic that
Right.
you know sends those needs skyrocketing. So then what do? You know, I think it just has to be an ongoing discussion
Sure.
versus this is just what we do, this is how we do it, because
Right.
those are conversations that I've had. This is how we do things and that's it. And that's some dangerous language.
And we need to have a system to evaluate whatever we're doing to try, again, because there's no, like you said, there's no right or wrong answer. So we try something, we evaluate it, we shift if it's not working, but we need those measures in place. You know, and I need a group to help me kind of put those parameters in place so that we're making, you know, the best experiences for all the kids.
So the kids have good academic experiences, but also have opportunities to develop genuine friendships
Yeah.
with disabled and non-disabled peers, right? They both have something to learn from each other, so.
For sure.
What does it look like for consultants and timing on?
So I actually have a meeting set up with South Coast to be able, I think I want to say not next week, the week after, to be able to start to have that conversation to do the work. Once I have that conversation with South Coast, depending on if they can, you know, meet our needs, then I will reach out to either like a SNEC, which is another collaborative. But when I kind of reached out to South Coast and put it out there of what I'm looking for, I mean, they are willing to come on board right away once we work out the kind of the logistics of what I'm looking for, right? So I don't anticipate us having.
I mean, I'm all in favor of it. I would just, in light of what we just talk about at all the meetings, to get permission rather than just the bill pay.
Yes.
Like, I think it's a valid
Yes.
thing to put on that we're going to go forward. You brought it to the subcommittee, which is the way it should go, but at some point it should go to the full committee to say, we need to, this is what we're looking for, this is the rationale, it's gonna cost us 50,000, 30,000, like we did with the
Yes.
Walker report.
Yeah.
We didn't just get the Walker report without the subcommittee or without the full committee.
Right.
And then say, oh, by the way, the Walker report cost us 30 grand, so, yeah, I think you're doing it the right way, but I would do it sooner than later so that you
I
can get
know.
it done
I know.
and even if it's just a placeholder,
Right.
that you guys work out a number, come to us and we say, yes, I think this is a valid
Then
use
you
of
just-
funds. At that point, you now have ability to do the, whatever you gotta do to get them in. That would be
Okay.
my only comment. Any thoughts, other thoughts on that? No? Good, we're moving right along. So, 3.06 is the discussion on the Rottenberg Education Center follow-up. I put this on because at the last meeting, public meeting, we talked about, we were going back and forth, and I said, we're gonna put it on here to see if there's any updates, any things that you wanna discuss, anything the members would wanna discuss. If there's nothing to discuss, we can move on, but I wanna throw it out there as an opportunity if there's any additional info.
Yeah, I think that at the school committee meeting, there was a request for a second opinion, and I have forwarded that request to Attorney Assad, so that, and he is working through that. So when we have that information, I'll share with the committee. So that's where we are with that. Absolutely.
Any other questions or thoughts on that? My only question would be on what we talked about, was there was a student that was in hospital waiting. Any updates on that child?
That student is still in the hospital awaiting a placement.
Okay.
Again, several packets have gone out, and there's been nothing available for them right now.
I would say that that's problematic in general, like when the student's in the hospital not able to be placed. And although I voted against this particular place under that condition, as professionals and you guys are in the field, if there's nowhere else, and do you think that at some point that would have to, I think I would ask you to bring it back and say, we've done this. I think we
Yeah.
didn't do that before, but I'm giving you my clearest thing. Like, you tell us there's nowhere else for this kid's child to go.
Yeah.
I can still disagree with some of it, but I also don't think keeping a kid in the hospital is the right thing either. So
Yeah.
I'm at some point looking to,
Last time I checked, which was probably a week ago, with our out-of-district team chair, even the Judd Rotenberg Center did not have availability right now. So it's not like we're holding her there, right? We're not. But that can change on a daily basis, so I haven't heard.
yeah, no, just trying to
Yeah.
keep us
I-
apprised of it. I don't like to have, you need to do what you need to do. And all I'm asking for is you say to us honestly, I'll speak for myself, there's really nowhere else. We've done the due diligence and all that stuff. I don't think I felt that way in the past, but there's gotta be a place. And if there's not, then the state needs to step in and do something to say, why is there no place to service all children, no matter what their needs are? And that's just my 2
Much
cents.
bigger.
Yeah, that's a
Sure.
big issue.
Sure.
No, I get it, but I think at some point we need to,
Yeah.
I mean, the money that we're talking is good money,
Mhm.
but if they still can't, with that kind of money, service children, then there has to be some other solution.
Mhm.
Because I'm sure this one kid that's waiting in the hospital is not the only
Right.
child.
It's-
Oh, no.
It's
So-
physical
No,
space, like, I mean,
it's
everybody's
yeah,
maxed out.
exactly.
It's physical space, they don't have, can't take kids in.
And part of that is because there was such a dramatic shift
Mhm.
in how services have played out in the state. So it used to be we had lots of residential placements, and so packets would go out, you were struggling to fill beds. But then there was a big push to get kids back in their homes and in their communities with supports. And so that's where the money went. The money came out of residentials and into home-based, community-based care. But then that left kids, there are still kids who need
Need it.
residential care, right? So even though I'm pushing inclusion doesn't mean that the kids are just, out floating around everywhere just for the sake of saying they're included. But the shift has been that lots of placements have closed. And even within placements, beds have closed within placements, so they've downsized dramatically. So it causes such a disruption in care for the kids that need that higher
So
level.
I would say, I would recommend, who made the decision to close those beds and shift from one to the other?
A lot of that came out of the Children's Behavioral Health Initiative about 15 years ago.
But the legislature has something
Yeah, the
to
state.
do about it, so
Mhm.
my suggestion is, while this is going on, you and your, I don't know what the organization was, all these special ed directors or
Yeah.
or whatever, I think it's incumbent upon you all, and maybe this is already happening, get those folks to the table to say, this is what we have to do. Let's have a public meeting to talk about, what are you doing for these services? Why does it, not to call them out, but to call
We're
them out.
talking advocacy. I'll do this all day.
But I just think that's important, because now we say, like superintendent has an association, we have an association. You guys have, everybody needs to say, no, you made this decision, and now you're putting us in tough spots, and the children aren't getting the services. So I think, for what it's worth, I think I would go that route to at least acknowledge we're trying, we're doing this, we're doing that, and the state has $3 billion in surplus. If there's ever a time to open up some more beds and some other opportunities,
Residentials.
Yes.
It's
I'm sure they don't get reimbursed, even though that's a lot of money what we had, but there's gotta be a reason why. If they're not doing it, then it was like they probably shifted a little too quick, and now you gotta shift probably back a little bit. So if they say incentivize, it's just like us, if we have the ability to give more money to somebody to come work here than somebody else with a bonus or something, we could poach people like that, but some things are not allowed. In those cases, they could say, we're gonna do that, so I just would encourage you to,
It's
So we
that
can
we've
do-
got kids that are waiting in hospitals, waiting for just inpatient beds. We have kids that are waiting in emergency rooms and are waiting for weeks. Or we have kids with co-occurring disorders, and so they won't take this kid with this mental health issue, even though they meet the criteria for that psychiatric level of care. But because they have this co-occurring diagnosis, a lot of times it's our kids with developmental or cognitive disabilities. If you've got an autistic kid with also depression and that kid needs a psychiatric bed, good luck trying to find a
There's
psychiatric bed for
none.
that kid. Because so many places are just not, they don't have the knowledge, or they feel like they don't have the capability to service those kids. And so those kids end up waiting, and they wait in a hospital bed, sometimes in the hallway of the ER, until that crisis abates, and then they go back home, and then a crisis
again next day.
resurfaces.
yeah, something needs to happen, so. Anything else? 4.01 is new business, any new business? Hearing none, motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn.
made by Ms. Larrabee, second by Ms. Roderick, all in favor? Aye, opposed,
Aye.
so voted. Thank you all very much, thank you for
Thank you,
successfully
Lori.
having your first meeting.
Welcome.
Have a great night.